The cleaning lady opened a letter in Chinese in front of her boss. The next day, Sarah Johnson had worked as a cleaning lady for 3 years in businessman Richard Miller's office, always arriving early and doing her job quietly. That Tuesday morning, as she entered the main room to start cleaning, she found an open letter on the glass table, covered in Chinese characters that seemed to dance under the fluorescent light. Without a second thought, she picked up the paper to put it somewhere safe when Richard walked through the door. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening as he saw her holding the document. To his complete shock, Sarah began reading aloud, perfectly translating each word that revealed a desperate plea from a woman searching for her son, lost decades ago. "Dear American family who adopted my son," Sarah translated with a trembling voice. "I know you may not understand my language, but I hope someone can read these words. I have been searching for my boy for 50 years. He has a crescent-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder and was wearing a green jade pendant when he was taken from the orphanage in New York City." Richard felt his legs weaken. He steadied himself against the table, his face losing all color as he watched the cleaning lady continue reading as if it were completely natural. How did she know Chinese? How could this simple woman, whom he had only ever seen mopping floors, master such a complex language? "It goes on here," Sarah said, noticing his state. "The woman writes that the boy was adopted on March 15, 1974, was 2.5 years old, and that she never stopped looking for him." You understand Chinese?" Richard managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Sarah carefully placed the letter back on the table, her hands shaking slightly. For 3 years, she had kept this part of her life a secret, pretending to be just another uneducated worker. But now, there was no turning back. "Yes, I do, Mr. Richard. I was a Mandarin professor at the university before I had to change my life." The businessman sank heavily into his chair, still processing the information. March 15th, 1974. 2.5 years old. Orphanage in New York City. Each detail hammered in his head like stones. He had been born on March 15th, 1971, which would have made him exactly 2.5 on that date. And the pendant. "Mr. Richard, are you okay?" Sarah asked, worried about his paleness. Richard stood abruptly and walked to the safe behind his desk. With trembling fingers, he entered the code and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside rested a green jade pendant, exactly as described in the letter. "My mother said it was a family heirloom," he murmured, holding the jewel. "I always thought it was strange since we don't have Asian ancestry." Sarah stepped closer, examining the pendant. She immediately recognized the symbols engraved on the stone. "These characters mean eternal love between mother and child," she translated softly. "It's very old, probably passed down through generations." The office fell silent for long minutes. Richard stared at the pendant while Sarah waited, unsure whether to keep speaking or leave. The letter remained open on the table, like a bridge between two worlds she never imagined would meet. "How did you end up working here?" Richard suddenly asked. Sarah hesitated. Telling the truth would mean revealing a lifetime of secrets, difficult choices and sacrifices that had brought her here. "It's a long story, Mr. Richard." "We have time," he said, placing the pendant back in the box. "And after today, I think I deserve to know who the person working in my home for 3 years really is." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Sarah sat in the chair across from the desk, something she had never done in all her years working there. She took a deep breath before beginning. "I was born into a Chinese family that immigrated to the United States in the 80s. My parents had big dreams. They wanted me to become a doctor or a lawyer. I managed to graduate with a degree in literature, specializing in Eastern languages, and even taught at the university for a while." "What happened?" Richard asked, genuinely interested. "My husband died in a work accident when our daughter was just 5. I had no experience with bureaucracy. I didn't know how to handle insurance, pensions, any of that. We lost our home, our savings. I had to leave the university because the schedule didn't allow me to care for my daughter alone." Richard listened in silence, beginning to understand the weight of the choices this woman had faced. I started working as a cleaner because it was the job that gave me the most flexibility. My daughter needed me. During the day, she was at school, so I could work. At night, I helped with her homework. And your daughter, how is she now? Sarah's face brightened for the first time in the conversation. She graduated from medical school last year. She's doing her residency in pediatrics. All the sacrifice was worth it. Richard was impressed. This woman had given up her academic career to ensure her daughter had a better future. How many times had he passed her without even properly greeting her? Sarah, forgive me for never asking about your life before. There's no need to apologize, Mr. Richard. I preferred to keep things separate. But about this letter, she glanced at the paper on the desk. May I ask how it got here? Richard picked up the letter again, studying the characters he now knew held deep meaning. It arrived in the mail yesterday. There was no sender, just my name and address on the envelope. I thought it was spam or a mistake. I almost threw it away. The woman who wrote this is very distressed, Sarah said, rereading parts of it. She mentions she's ill, and that this may be her last chance to find her son. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. For 50 years, he had wondered about his origins. His adoptive parents, George and Jennifer Miller, had always been evasive about the details of his adoption. They only said he'd been abandoned and that they'd chosen him out of love. Do you think? He began, but couldn't finish the sentence. I think you should look into it. The details match perfectly. The date, the age, the orphanage, the locket. It can't be a coincidence. But how? My parents have passed. I don't have detailed adoption records. Sarah thought for a moment. Actually, Mr. Richard, I might be able to help with that. I know the Chinese community in New York City very well. If this woman is really searching, someone must know her. Richard looked at her with an expression of both hope and fear. You'd do that? Even after I've been such a distant boss all these years? Of course. A mother searching for her son is one of the most sacred things there is. At that moment, the office door opened and in walked Jennifer, Richard's wife. She stopped abruptly when she saw the two of them talking as equals, the cleaner seated across from her husband. Richard, what's going on here? Jennifer asked, her tone clearly irritated. Richard looked at his wife, then at Sarah, and made a decision that would change everything. Jennifer, I need to tell you something. Please, sit down. Jennifer reluctantly sat in the other chair, casting suspicious glances at Sarah. This letter arrived yesterday, said Richard, showing the paper. Sarah discovered she knows Mandarin and translated it for me. It's from a woman searching for her son who was adopted. And what does this have to do with us? Asked Jennifer, impatient. Richard picked up the small box with the locket and placed it on the table. The descriptions match me exactly, Jennifer. The adoption date, my age at the time, and this locket that my mother always said was a family heirloom. Jennifer looked at the locket, then at the letter, and finally at Sarah. You understand Chinese? She asked, suspicious. Yes, Mrs. Jennifer. I was a university professor before I started working here. A professor? Jennifer looked at her husband in disbelief. Richard, did you know about this? No, Jennifer. I just found out. Sarah kept this information private all these years. Jennifer fell silent, processing the information. After 15 years of marriage to Richard, she knew well his anguish about not knowing his origins. He always wondered if he had siblings, if his birth parents were still alive, if he would ever know where he truly came from. What do you plan to do? She asked, calmer now. Sarah offered to help investigate. She knows the Chinese community in New York City. Jennifer looked at the cleaner with new eyes. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned the house, but someone who could help solve a mystery that had haunted her husband for decades. All right, Jennifer finally said, but I want to be involved. If we're going to dig into this, we do it together. Richard smiled for the first time since he'd seen the letter. Having his wife's support meant everything. Sarah, when could you start the investigation? I can make some calls this afternoon if you'd like. I have contacts in the community. If this woman is really in New York City, I'll find her. But first, Jennifer interrupted, I want to know more about you, Sarah. If you're going to help us with something this important, I need to know you better. Sarah nodded, understanding Jennifer's concern. It was natural for her to want to protect her husband. Of course, Mrs. Jennifer. What would you like to know? How did you learn Chinese so well? It's very difficult for us Americans. My parents always spoke Mandarin at home. They insisted I keep their culture alive. When I went to university, I chose to specialize in East Asian languages. I spent 2 years studying in China, funded by a scholarship. Jennifer was impressed. The image she had of the cleaner was completely transforming. And why did you never mention this before? Sarah sighed. When you need a job urgently, sometimes it's better not to complicate things. People might think you're trying to act superior to the work you're doing, or that you'll leave at the first better opportunity. I needed this job and wanted to keep it. Richard felt ashamed. How many times had he judged people by their appearance or the role they held? Sarah was so much more than he'd ever imagined. Well, now we know who you really are, he said, and I'm honored to have you as, may I say, as a friend? Sarah smiled, touched. Of course, Mr. Richard. It will be a pleasure to help you both. Just Richard is fine. I think we're past formalities, don't you? Jennifer watched the interaction between the two and began to feel more at ease. There was sincerity in both Sarah's offer to help and her husband's gratitude. So it's decided, Jennifer said. Sarah will investigate this letter, but I have one condition. They both looked at her, waiting. If we find out this woman really is your birth mother, Richard, I want to be there for the first meeting. This is very important for our family. Richard took his wife's hand, moved. Of course, my love, I wouldn't do this without you. Sarah gathered her cleaning supplies, which had been forgotten in the corner of the room. Can I leave early today to make some calls? I know a few people who go to the Chinese Cultural Center. If anyone knows anything, it'll be them. You can go right now, said Richard. And Sarah, thank you, not just for the translation, but for caring. After Sarah left, Richard and Jennifer were alone in the office. The letter was still on the desk, a physical reminder that their lives might be about to change forever. Are you ready for this? Jennifer asked softly. Richard looked out the window, watching the street below. I don't know, Jennifer. My whole life I've wondered about my origins. Now that I might get some answers, I'm scared. Scared of what? What if she's not who I'm hoping for? What if it's just a coincidence? Or worse, what if it is her, but she doesn't like the man I've become? Jennifer stood up and hugged her husband from behind. Richard, you're a good man. You built an honest business. You're a loving husband, a present father to our children. Any mother would be proud of you. Our children, Richard murmured. How are we going to tell Michael and Emily? Michael, 17, and Emily, 15, knew their father was adopted, but had never dug deeper into the subject. Let's wait for Sarah to come back with concrete information. No point in worrying them for nothing. Richard nodded, but he knew he wouldn't be able to focus on work that day. His mind was completely fixed on the possibility of finally learning about his roots. Jennifer, you're not upset with Sarah for hiding that she was a teacher? Jennifer thought for a moment. At first I was. It felt like a lie. But then I understood her side. How often do we, people with more financial means, judge those who work for us? She was just protecting herself. That's true. I feel bad for never showing interest in her life. Well, now you can change that. And who knows, after all this, maybe we can help her in some way too. The office phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Richard answered mechanically, but his mind was far from business. What would it be like to have a biological mother? What would it be like to talk to someone who shared his genes, his physical traits? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Sarah arrived home and immediately called her best friend, Lee Jenny, who worked as an interpreter in New York City's Chinatown. Jenny, I need your help with something urgent, Sarah said as soon as her friend answered. Of course, Sarah, what's going on? A Chinese woman is looking for her son, who was adopted 50 years ago. I have a letter from her, but I don't know who she is. Do you know anyone in the community who might be searching like this?" Jenny was silent for a few seconds. "Sarah, this is very specific. Let me think. There's an elderly woman who goes to the cultural center, Mrs. Liu Wei-min. She always talks about a son she lost decades ago. Everyone knows her story." Sarah's heart raced. What does she look like? How old is she? She must be in her 70s. She's a petite woman, very elegant, even though she's simple. She always wears a necklace with a small photo, says it's of her son. "Jenny, I need to find this woman today. Is it possible? She's usually at the cultural center on Thursdays, but I can call around and find out where she lives. Why the urgency?" Sarah briefly explained the situation without mentioning specific names. "Oh my God, Sarah. Do you think you've finally found her son?" "The details match perfectly. I need to be sure." "All right, I'll make some calls." "I'll call you in an hour with information." While she waited, Sarah reread the letter several times. Each word conveyed deep anguish, the desperation of a mother who never stopped searching. The phone rang exactly 1 hour later. "Sarah, I did it. Mrs. Liu lives in an apartment in Chinatown. She's home today, just got back from the doctor. I can take you there if you'd like." "Jenny, you're an angel. Can I pick you up now?" "Of course. But Sarah, prepare yourself. Mrs. Liu has suffered greatly. Losing her son marked her entire life." An hour later, Sarah stood in front of a modest building in Chinatown, accompanied by Li Jenny. They went up to the 4th floor and rang the bell for apartment 42. A small, delicate woman opened the door. When she saw Jenny, she smiled warmly. "Jenny, what a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in." "Mrs. Liu, this is my friend Sarah. She has something important to discuss with you." Liu Wei-min studied Sarah with curiosity, but invited them inside. The apartment was small and simple, but extremely tidy. The walls were covered with photos of Asian children. "These are all the boys I've found over the years," Mrs. Liu explained, noticing Sarah's gaze. "Whenever I saw an Asian child on the streets, I wondered if it could be my son." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. This woman had dedicated her entire life to searching for her boy. "Mrs. Liu, did you send any letters recently? To someone American?" The woman's eyes lit up. "I sent several. A young man from the Chinese Cultural Center helped me find addresses of families who adopted children in the 70s. "Why?" Did someone respond? Sarah took the letter from her bag. "Do you recognize this?" Mrs. Liu took the paper with trembling hands and immediately began to cry. "It's my handwriting. It's my letter. Did someone read it? Did they understand what I wrote?" "Yes, Mrs. Liu, and I believe we found your son." The woman nearly fainted. Jenny had to help her sit on the sofa. "Are you sure? How can you be certain?" Sarah told her about Richard, about the locket, about all the details that matched perfectly. "The green jade locket," Mrs. Liu whispered. "It belonged to my grandmother, then my mother. It was all I had of value when I had to leave him at the orphanage." She stood and went to an old cabinet, pulling out a shoebox full of papers. "I kept everything, every document, every photo. Here's the receipt from the orphanage." Sarah examined the yellowed paper. Date, March 15th, 1974. Child's name, Liu David. Age, 2 years and 6 months. Distinguishing features, crescent-shaped birthmark on the right shoulder. "Mrs. Liu, the man who received your letter has exactly these features." The woman wept uncontrollably, clutching Sarah's hands. "My boy, my David. After 50 years, he's alive? He's well?" "He is. His name is Richard now. He's a successful businessman, married with 2 children. He's a good man." "Can I see him?" Mrs. Liu asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "He wants to meet you too." "But Mrs. Liu, he doesn't speak Mandarin. Will that—" "It doesn't matter. Language isn't important. A mother's heart speaks all languages." Jenny was moved, translating some parts to ensure Sarah understood everything correctly. "Mrs. Liu wants to know if she can bring anything for him. She's saved gifts all these years. The woman stood again and brought out another, larger box. Inside were unworn children's clothes, old toys, and dozens of letters written in Chinese. I wrote him a letter every year on his birthday, she explained. 50 letters about my life, asking how he was. Sarah was too emotional to speak. This mother's devotion was heartbreaking. When can I take you to meet him? Tomorrow, Mrs. Liu asked eagerly. I'll call him and confirm. But Mrs. Liu, he's nervous too. It's a very special moment for both of them. I understand. I'm also nervous, but happy, very happy. Sarah picked up the phone and called Richard. Richard, I found your mother. The silence on the other end lasted several long seconds. Are you sure? He finally asked. Absolutely. She has all the documents, recognized the letter immediately. She wants to meet you tomorrow. I don't know if I'm ready. Richard, she waited 50 years for this moment. And she saved birthday letters for you all these years. Richard began to cry on the other end of the line. Okay, tomorrow. Where? How about at your place? A familiar setting, with your wife there. Perfect. What time? In the morning, around 10. It's a deal. Sarah. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to repay anything. Seeing a mother reunite with her son is the greatest gift I could receive. When Sarah hung up, she found Mrs. Liu and Jenny waiting anxiously. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, she announced. Mrs. Liu clapped her hands like a child, beaming with happiness. That night, Richard barely slept. Jennifer stayed awake too, feeling her husband's anxiety. What if there's no natural connection? He asked for the 10th time. Richard, she's your birth mother. The connection already exists. You just need to discover it. Do you think our kids will accept having a Chinese grandmother? Michael and Emily are smart kids. They'll be happy you found your roots. The next morning, Richard woke up earlier than usual. He took a long shower, chose his clothes carefully. He wanted to make a good impression on the mother he hadn't seen in 50 years. Jennifer prepared a special breakfast with fruits and homemade cakes. She wanted the house to be perfect for Mrs. Liu's arrival. At 9:30, Michael and Emily came down to the kitchen. Why is everyone so dressed up? Emily asked. Richard looked at Jennifer, who nodded. Kids, sit down. We need to talk to you about something important. The two teenagers sat, curious. You know I was adopted as a child, right? Of course, Dad, Michael said. Grandpa George and Grandma Jennifer always told us that. Well, yesterday we found out who my birth mother is, and she's coming here now to meet me. Emily's eyes widened. Really? That's amazing. How did you find her? Richard briefly explained about the letter and Sarah's role in the discovery. So Sarah isn't just our cleaner? Michael asked, impressed. No, she's a very smart woman who helped us tremendously. And our new grandmother? What's she like? Emily wanted to know. She's a Chinese lady, very kind. She searched for me for 50 years. The two teens were moved by the story. Can we stay here when she arrives? Emily asked. If you behave and let us talk first, Jennifer said. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Richard felt his heart race. Jennifer held his hand, giving him strength. Let's go together, she said. When they opened the door, they saw Sarah accompanied by a small, elegant woman, dressed simply but with great care. Mrs. Liu held a large bag and looked at Richard with tears in her eyes. Richard, Sarah said softly, this is Liu Wei Min, your birth mother. Mrs. Liu, this is Richard, your son David. Mrs. Liu stepped forward slowly, reaching out to touch Richard's face. When her fingers touched his skin, she began to sob uncontrollably. My boy, she said in broken English. My beautiful son. Richard also started crying, unable to speak. 50 years of unanswered questions, emptiness and curiosity all melted away in that touch. Mrs. Liu opened her bag and pulled out an old, yellowed photograph. It was her, 50 years younger, holding a baby. You, she said, showing the photo. Last day together. Richard took the photo with trembling hands. The resemblance was impossible to deny. The same eye shape, the same smile, the same birthmark visible on the baby's shoulder. Jennifer approached and gently invited everyone inside. "Let's sit in the living room. Sarah, can you stay to translate?" "Of course." Mrs. Liu entered the house, looking around curiously. She stopped in front of the family photos on the living room shelf. "Your children," she said, pointing to Michael and Emily. "Beautiful, lovely family." Richard introduced his wife and children. Mrs. Liu greeted each one warmly, especially the grandchildren, who watched everything with fascination. "Mrs. Liu brought some things for you," said Sarah. The woman opened a large bag and began taking out the gifts she had saved for decades. Carefully preserved baby clothes, old toys, and the 50 birthday letters. "One letter for every year we spent apart," translated Sarah. Richard picked up one of the letters at random and asked Sarah to read it. It was from his 10th birthday. "My dear son, today you turn 10. You must be in school now, learning new things. I hope you are happy, that you have friends, that your adoptive parents love you as I always have. I dream that one day we can reunite. Your mother who never forgot, Liu Wei Min." Everyone in the room was moved. Michael and Emily approached their newly discovered grandmother, eager to get to know her better. "Grandma Liu," said Emily, testing the name. "Can you teach me some words in Mandarin?" Mrs. Liu beamed and began teaching simple words to her grandchildren. Her joy was contagious. Richard watched the scene, still trying to process that this kind woman was his birth mother. He had so many questions but didn't know where to start. "Sarah, can you ask why she had to leave me at the orphanage?" Sarah translated the question, and Mrs. Liu grew serious for a moment before answering. "She says that at the time China was going through a very difficult period. Her husband had passed away, and she couldn't support a child alone. Her family forced her to come to the United States to work as a housemaid, but she couldn't bring her child. It was the hardest decision of her life. And she never had other children." Mrs. Liu shook her head and said something in Mandarin. "She says you were the only child of her heart. She never remarried because all her energy was focused on finding you." Richard felt both honored and guilty. This woman had dedicated her entire life to searching for him. "Can I ask about my birth father?" Mrs. Liu took out a photo from her bag. It showed a young man in a military uniform. "His name was Liu Hong," translated Sarah. "He was a soldier. He died in an accident when you were 1. Mrs. Liu says you have his eyes." Richard studied the photo. There were indeed striking similarities. "Do I have other family in China? Siblings?" "No. Her family didn't approve of the marriage. When she came to the United States, they cut ties. You are the only family she has." Jennifer approached Mrs. Liu and, through gestures and a few English words the woman knew, managed to express her gratitude for giving birth to Richard. "Thank you for my husband," said Jennifer, emotional. Mrs. Liu understood perfectly and hugged her daughter-in-law tenderly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Lunch was prepared together. Jennifer made sure to include Mrs. Liu in the preparations, and the woman contributed by making a simple Chinese dish for which she had brought the ingredients. During the meal, Michael asked a question that had been puzzling everyone. "Dad, now that you've found your birth mother, are you going to change your name? Go back to your Chinese name?" Richard looked at Mrs. Liu, then at Sarah. "Can you ask what she thinks?" Mrs. Liu listened to the translation and gave a lengthy reply. "She says Richard is who you've become. David was the baby she lost. She's happy to meet Richard, the successful man her son grew up to be. The name doesn't matter. What's in the heart is what counts." Richard was moved by the wisdom of her answer. After lunch, Mrs. Liu showed more old photos, sharing stories about the family in China. Sarah patiently translated every detail. "This is your great-grandmother," she said, pointing to an old photo. "She made the jade pendant you have. She was a skilled jeweler. And this one? Your grandmother. She was a calligraphy teacher. Mrs. Liu says you inherited her intelligence." Emily was fascinated by the stories. "Grandma Liu, can I learn Chinese calligraphy?" Mrs. Liu beamed and promised to teach her granddaughter. By late afternoon, when it was time to say goodbye, Everyone was reluctant to let Mrs. Liu leave. "Can she come to dinner with us tomorrow?" Jennifer asked. "And on the weekend," Michael added. Richard realized his family had embraced Mrs. Liu so naturally. That kind woman had won them all over in just a few hours. "Sarah, can you ask if she'd like to have dinner with us tomorrow? And if she needs anything? Where does she live? How are her living conditions?" Sarah translated, and Mrs. Liu answered shyly. "She lives in a small apartment in Chinatown. She gets by on a very small pension and occasional translation jobs. She'd be very happy to come for dinner tomorrow." Richard looked at Jennifer, who nodded immediately. "Sarah, tell her that from now on she's part of our family. She won't have to worry about money or being alone anymore." When Sarah translated, Mrs. Liu began to cry again. "She wants to know if she can repay you somehow." "You can teach my children Mandarin," Richard said, "and you can teach me about our culture, our family history." Mrs. Liu left the house with a full heart, carrying a new family photo and the promise that she would finally no longer be alone. After they left, the family stayed in the living room, talking about the extraordinary day they'd just had. "Dad, I can't believe the cleaning lady was a teacher," Michael said. "That's crazy." "It shows we should never judge people by their appearance or job," Richard replied. "And Grandma Liu is lovely," Emily added. "I can't wait to learn Mandarin from her." Jennifer watched her husband, noticing how he seemed more complete, as if a missing piece had finally fallen into place. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Whole," Richard answered simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I know who I am." That night, Richard called Sarah to thank her again. "Sarah, I don't have the words to express my gratitude. You've changed my life." "I'm happy I could help, Richard. Seeing your reunion was so moving." "I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "I want you to go back to translation and teaching. I can help you set up a language center or get a position at a university. You're too talented to just be cleaning offices." Sarah was silent for a moment. "Richard, that's so generous, but..." "No buts. This is how I want to repay you. Besides, I'll need your services as an interpreter regularly. I want to build a real relationship with my mother, and that takes communication. In that case, I accept, but I also want to keep helping your family in other ways. You've all become very special to me." The next morning, Richard arrived at the office with a completely new outlook on life. He called his assistant and asked to cancel all his morning meetings. "Why, Mr. Richard?" "I need to take care of some important personal matters. From today on, my family will come before business." It was a radical change for a man who had always been a workaholic. That afternoon, Richard went to Chinatown to pick up Mrs. Liu for dinner. He wanted to see where she lived, to better understand her reality. The apartment was small and modest, but extremely clean and tidy. On the walls were hundreds of photos of Asian children cut out from newspapers and magazines. "All these years," explained Sarah, who had come with them, "Mrs. Liu cut out pictures of any Asian child she came across, imagining it could be you." Richard was deeply moved. He looked at the old furniture, the simplicity of the decor, the humble life his mother had lived for decades. "Sarah, tell her I want to help improve her living conditions." "Richard, she's very proud. You'll need to be delicate." "Then I'll say I need her close to the family, that we want her to move somewhere nearer to our home." When Sarah translated, Mrs. Liu protested at first, but gave in when she understood it was for the family's sake. She agrees, but she wants to contribute somehow. She says she can cook, take care of the children, teach Mandarin. Perfect. She'll be our private teacher in Chinese culture. That week, Richard helped Mrs. Liu move into a comfortable apartment just 2 blocks from his house. He also bought new furniture and made sure she had everything she needed. The most significant change, however, was happening in the family dynamic. Michael and Emily spent every afternoon with their newly discovered grandmother, learning Mandarin and listening to stories about Asian culture. Jennifer developed a special bond with Mrs. Liu, communicating through a mix of gestures, basic English, and some Chinese words she was learning. Sarah became much more than an interpreter. She became the family's advisor, helping them navigate the cultural and emotional differences of their reunion. A month after their first meeting, Richard organized a reunion birthday party to celebrate finding his birth mother. "Sarah, you and your daughter are our guests of honor," he said. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." The party brought together close friends, Li Jenny, and others from the Chinese community who had helped in the search. Mrs. Liu was radiant, finally surrounded by the large family she had always dreamed of having. During the party, Michael gave a heartfelt speech. "Grandma Liu, before you came, our family was complete, but we didn't know it was incomplete. You brought a joy and a culture we didn't realize were missing. Thank you for searching for my father all these years," Emily added. "And thank you for teaching me that family can grow at any time in life. You've shown me that love has no borders or language barriers." Mrs. Liu didn't need translation to feel the love in her grandchildren's words. She cried with emotion and hugged each of them tightly. Richard stood to give his own speech. "For 50 years I lived with an unanswered question. Who were my birth parents? Where did I come from? What traits did I inherit? Now I know I inherited my mother's determination. She never gave up looking for me. I inherited my father's strength of will. He fought for his family until the very end. And most of all, I inherited the ability to love deeply, because it was that love that brought my mother back to me after 5 decades. He turned to Sarah. "And you, Sarah, taught us that extraordinary people can be found in the most ordinary places. You could have simply set the letter aside and continued with your cleaning. But you chose to get involved, to care, to make a difference. That's why I want to officially announce that you are our new Director of International Relations for the company. We're expanding into Asian markets, and we need someone who understands not just the language, but the culture." Sarah Johnson was too emotional to speak. Her daughter, present at the party, was proud of her mother. "Mom, I always knew you were special," she said. "Now everyone else knows too." The party went on late into the night, with Mrs. Liu teaching traditional Chinese dances to the children and telling stories about festivals and traditions from her homeland. In the months that followed, the family's life was completely transformed. The house filled with elements of Chinese culture. Jennifer learned to cook Asian dishes. Michael began studying Chinese history. Emily became fluent in basic Mandarin. Richard started visiting his mother every day, often bringing work to do at her house just to keep her company. Mrs. Liu felt useful and loved for the first time in decades. One day, while organizing old photos, Mrs. Liu showed Richard a document she had carefully kept. "What's this?" he asked Sarah, who was present. "It's his original birth certificate from China. She managed to get a copy before coming to the United States." Richard examined the document. His full Chinese name was Liu David, which meant little shining light. "Mama," he said, using the Chinese word he had learned, "why did you choose this name for me?" Mrs. Liu explained through Sarah. "She says that when you were born, even though it was a very difficult time in her life, you brought light and hope. That's why the name. And she was right, because you became a shining light even after you were separated." Richard was moved by the meaning. He decided to officially add his Chinese name to his documents, becoming Richard David Miller. 6 months after their reunion, Richard received an unexpected call. "Richard," said a hesitant voice on the other end. "My name is Joe Kevin. I'm a businessman from New York City. I heard about your story through the Chinese community. I'm also looking for lost family." Richard was intrigued. "How can I help you?" "My grandmother told me she had a grandson lost in the United States, adopted by an American family in the 70s. The dates and circumstances match yours." Richard's heart raced. "Are you saying we might be cousins? My grandmother is your mother's sister, Liu Weimin." Richard nearly dropped the phone. "Could there be more family in China? Can we meet? I can bring my grandmother." "Of course. But let me tell my mother first. She'll be so happy." When Richard shared the news with Mrs. Liu, she fainted from emotion. Her older sister was alive, and also in the United States. The meeting was set for the following Sunday at Richard's house. The whole family was eager to meet their new relatives. Joe Kevin arrived with an elderly woman even older than Mrs. Liu, but with clearly similar facial features. When the two sisters saw each other after more than 50 years, The reunion was even more emotional than Richard's with his mother. They hugged and cried for long minutes, speaking rapidly in Mandarin. "What are they saying?" Jennifer asked Sarah. "They're telling each other everything they've missed." The older sister thought Mrs. Liu had died in China. Mrs. Liu thought her family had rejected her forever. Joe Kevin approached Richard respectfully. "Cousin, it's an honor to meet you. My grandmother kept a baby photo of you all these years." He showed a photo identical to the one Mrs. Liu had shared at their first meeting. "My grandmother managed to come to the United States 10 years after her mother, but when she arrived here, she didn't know how to find her. New York City is so big, and the Chinese community was smaller back then." Richard was stunned. Finding his mother had already been unbelievable. Now, discovering he had more family was almost surreal. During lunch, the two grandmothers shared stories of their childhood in China, about Richard's parents whom he had never known, and about family traditions that had been lost over time. Joe Kevin revealed that he was also a businessman and proposed a business partnership with Richard. "We could create a family company, connect the United States and China through business. Our personal story could become our professional strength." Richard liked the idea. He had always wanted to expand internationally, but didn't know where to start. Now he had family in China who could help. "Sarah, it looks like we'll need your services even more," he said, smiling. Sarah was happy to see how a simple letter had sparked so many wonderful discoveries. In the months that followed, Richard's life became a true fairy tale. The company began importing products from China with Joe Kevin's help. Sarah was promoted to international director, and the family grew to include not just Mrs. Liu but also her sister and the newly discovered cousins. Michael and Emily now had two Chinese grandmothers who competed to see who could best teach them about Asian culture. The house was always full of laughter, Mandarin conversations, the aroma of Asian food, and family stories. Jennifer adapted beautifully to the new dynamic, learning Chinese recipes and even some basic characters to communicate better with her mothers-in-law. A year after their first meeting, Richard organized a grand celebration to mark the anniversary of their reunion. This time the party included the entire extended family, friends from the Chinese community, and even some business contacts from China who had come to the United States. During the celebration, Richard gave an emotional speech. "A year ago, I was Richard Miller, an American businessman, an orphan of unknown origins. Today I am Richard David Miller, son of Liu Wei Min, grandson of master artisans, cousin of entrepreneurs, heir to a centuries-old culture. But most of all, I am a whole man who finally knows where he comes from and where he's going." He turned to Sarah. All of this began because an extraordinary woman, disguised as a cleaning lady, had the courage to read a letter that wasn't hers and cared enough to help a stranger. "Sarah, you didn't just reunite our family, you gave me back my identity." Sarah, now elegantly dressed in her new role as an executive, replied, "Richard, you taught me that it's never too late to start over. I had given up on my academic dreams, thinking I'd be a cleaning lady forever. You showed me that when we help others, we help ourselves too." Mrs. Liu stood up, supported by her sister, and spoke in Mandarin. Sarah translated for everyone. She says that for 50 years she prayed for her son to be happy, even without knowing him. Now she sees her prayers have been answered. Richard is not only happy, but has a heart big enough to include everyone around him in his happiness. The elder grandmother added something, and Sarah translated, "And she says our family now includes all of you. Not just blood relatives, but everyone who helped us find each other again. We are a chosen family, united by love and gratitude." Michael, now fluent in Mandarin, raised a toast. To Grandma Liu, who never gave up. To Sarah, who had the courage to get involved. To my dad, who opened his heart to a new reality. And to our crazy, wonderful family, which proves that love knows no borders. Everyone raised their glasses, and the celebration lasted until dawn, with 3 generations honoring a union that seemed predestined. 2 years later, Richard and Joe Kevin officially launched the company Chinese American Cultural Bridge, with Sarah as the educational director and Mrs. Liu as the cultural consultant. The company not only imported goods, but also promoted cultural exchange, offered Mandarin and Portuguese classes, and helped other separated families reunite. "We want our story to inspire others," Richard explained at the opening. "How many families are kept apart by circumstances, languages, or distance? We want to be the bridge that reconnects them." Sarah developed a special program to help Chinese immigrants integrate into American society, drawing from her own experience and knowledge of both cultures. Mrs. Liu became the unofficial matriarch of New York City's Chinese community, always ready to lend a hand and famous for her tales of perseverance and reunion. Michael chose to study international relations with a focus on China, inspired by his family's journey. Emily pursued medicine, but specialized in traditional Chinese medicine, blending the two cultures that were now part of her identity. Jennifer became an expert in Chinese American cuisine, and even wrote a cookbook merging both traditions. 5 years after their first reunion, the family gathered for another celebration when Richard made a special announcement. "Mom," he said, turning to Mrs. Liu, "we have a surprise for you." Jennifer stepped forward, cradling a baby in her arms. "This is your first great-grandchild, Richard David Miller, Jr." Mrs. Liu wept with emotion as she held the baby. 5 years earlier, she had believed she would die alone. Now, she had a great-grandson who carried the name she had chosen decades ago. "The family name isn't lost," she said in English, which she had learned over the years. Richard watched the scene with a full heart, from a lonely businessman with no past to the patriarch of a thriving multicultural family. All thanks to a letter in Chinese and a brave janitor who chose to care. Sarah, now remarried and a mother to another daughter, looked on with satisfaction at how a simple decision to read a letter had transformed so many lives. "You know the best part of this whole story?" she asked Richard, as they watched Mrs. Liu rocking her great-grandson. "What? This is just the beginning. This baby will grow up knowing his roots, speaking Mandarin, understanding both his cultures. He'll never have to wonder where he comes from." Richard smiled, watching his son in the arms of the grandmother he himself had met only 5 years earlier. "And it all started with you reading a letter that wasn't yours." "No," Sarah corrected. "It started with a mother who never gave up searching for her son. I was just the instrument fate used to bring you together." The celebration continued, with 3 generations honoring a story of perseverance, love, and reunion that had begun with a simple letter in Chinese and the courage of a woman who refused to ignore a plea for help. Years later, when they told the story to little Richard Jr., they always emphasized the same lesson. Never underestimate the power of a kind gesture, because we never know how a small act can change entire lives. The letter that was almost ignored became the family's most treasured document, framed in the living room as a reminder that love can overcome any distance, any barrier, any amount of time. And Sarah, the college professor who had disguised herself as a janitor out of necessity, became living proof that extraordinary people may be hidden in the most ordinary places, just waiting for the right moment to change the world around them. End of the story. Now tell us, what did you think of this heartwarming family reunion story? Do you believe destiny played a role in bringing them together, or was it just a coincidence? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. If you know a similar story, please share it with us. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more touching stories like this one.